Pandemic Pivot inside the HomeWorld Business Top 50 Housewares Retailers Report. Welcome. My name is Fran Grossbeck, and you are listening to the Cookware Manufacturers Association podcast. One of the CMA's goals is to keep our members informed. Today, we're excited to have guests from HomeWorld Business and NPD Group to discuss the new Top 50 Housewares Retailer Report. After 30 years of the Top 100 report, COVID and the new normal forced the team at HomeWorld Business to pivot fast and respond to what was really needed during this unique time. Today, we get to hear the full story of how this came about and some insights into the trends that have emerged. In this podcast, our guests are Peter Gianetti and Mike Duff from HomeWorld Business and Joe Derochowski from NPD Group. Peter is the editor-in-chief of HomeWorld Business and Mike is the executive editor. Joe is the Vice President and Industry Advisor for Home. You can find more information about HomeWorld Business on their website, homeworldbusiness.com, NPD on their website, npd.com, and of course, as always, you can learn more about the CMA from our website, cookware.org. Hi guys, thank you for joining us today. It's a beautiful fall day here, and I can't wait to get started because this is a really interesting topic for our industry. So Peter, I'm going to jump right in and start with you. Can you start by briefly explaining how this all came about?
Yeah, sure. And Fran, thanks very much for having me this morning. Generally, HomeWorld Business for 30 years has put together something we call the Top 100 Housewares Retailers Report. It's a scorecard for the industry, and it's something that it's one of our most anticipated editions of the year. It comes out in September every year. Usually, we begin the process of putting together the research to measure the top 100 retailers by houseware sales. We start that in the spring, once we have a chance to digest all of the year-end results. And it takes a while to put that together every year. But by the time we get to the release of the issue in September, we've got a pretty comprehensive list, typically, of the top 100 housewares retailers. And when you look at the evolution of the top 100 housewares retailers from when we started it in 1989 to where it ended last year, it was this kind of, it showed trends, but it showed trends over time. And it provided a very reliable kind of scorecard for the industry to let them know where the market share is in this business, how that evolves over time, and effectively kind of who you need to be interested in doing business with over the course of the next several months. We realized very early, as many companies in this industry did, around March, April, when we realized something really dramatically different is happening. And if we were going to, in September, put out a list of the top 100 retailers effectively from the year before, it wouldn't provide the type of up-to-date scorecard that this industry needs. Things changed overnight. And we needed an opportunity to kind of reset and pivot. You know, this industry has been pivoting, as you said, and we had that same responsibility to provide them with a new way of understanding how the balance of sales power in this industry had shifted during the pandemic. And there were many waves. There's that first part of the pandemic when we were in lockdown, and many of the brick and mortar stores were closed. Not all of them. And the ones that are near the top of the list, you'll see are the ones that continued to take top share because they were open during the pandemic. Obviously, people pivoted to digital. And then once there's that second part of that quarantine period when the stores began to reopen. So we realized we needed to look at the first 6 months. And we said the top 50 retailers are a good measuring stick. If we can investigate and analyze what the top housewares retailers were through the 6 months, that would provide our industry with a better metric, a better way of measuring where things stood. We turned to the NPD Group to help us with this. HomeWorld Business and the NPD Group have been collaborative really for most of the 30 years that I've been with this organization. And they have a product called Checkout, which is a panel of about 130,000 consumers, kind of omni-channel, that provide through their receipts a history of their purchases in stores and through e-commerce. And it's a product that allowed NPD to help us get a look at the top 50 housewares retailers by housewares volume. We put that to work. Mike Duff, who's our executive editor and our retail specialist, started working with, kind of his sources to get a picture of how the retailers kind of performed through the first half, all the factors that went into it. We worked with Joe to get some perspectives on what's happening in housewares and how that all factored into kind of first half trends. And we ended up with what I think is a pretty revealing report. Not only does it provide you with a list of the top 50 retailers by housewares volume through the 6 months, the combination of Mike's analysis and Joe's insights really give a complete picture of the dramatic change in this business and how that kind of portends to the future in this report. So we're real happy with it, and we think the industry got the scorecard they need for this year.
It was really interesting to see it come through, and I love what you just said about the shift in balance of power. We watched those reports as the industry to see how things are moving, and this was a significant shift. So to pivot and respond that way has been incredible.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
Joe, having worked so closely with HomeWorld Business on this report, what trends did you see emerge? How should the industry be responding?
Sure. Thanks, Fran. And first of all, thank you for having us part of this. I'm such a big believer in what the Cookware Manufacturers Association does. I believe in all your members that you have. It's an important time in our industry and in our overall industry, in that we get a chance to really change consumers' lives and make them for the better. And so I'm just glad to be part of this. And that's part of the reason of working with HomeWorld Business is I know similarly to the way I think that Peter and Mike, it's like, what can we do to help the retailers and manufacturers help consumers in these times and help them grow their business? Because there are certainly a lot of new needs to do it. And working out with Peter and them, as he mentioned, we use this service called checkout tracking, which is, it tracks everything that you purchase. So it's a longitudinal database that really is harvesting all the receipts that you have and looking at your overall spend so that you can really see how that spending pattern changes, not only across categories and across industries, but also across channels, across retailers, and just really get a good understanding of where that consumer is spending. And one of the things that we've learned during that pandemic is consumer has been very clear on where their spending is. They have been eating more at home and living more at home and schooling more at home. So that just means there's more meals at home. So there's been every week since the lockdown, since March 15th, the housewares industry has seen dramatic growth. And in fact, I just looked at the data this morning. Cookware through October 3rd during the pandemic is up 51%. And in fact, since the stimulus has gone down, it's still up 46%. So cookware is doing wonderful, as well as is the overall housewares business that we have. The other area that the consumer is spending money on is because they're living and working from home more, all those things related to working. So our tech business has been very hot, whether it's computers, monitors, things of that nature to help you work from home. And then the final thing really has been just keeping the kids and ourselves entertained. So we see 65-inch and plus TVs having record years. We see growth in PCs and iPads. We see video gaming at an all-time high. We see our toy industry just skyrocketing during this period. We see golf club sales skyrocketing. So all these things that keep ourselves active and keep our times occupied is up, which has also been pretty good because from a cooking perspective, that means there's more baking, there's more things that we can do to be interactive and involving time into our meals. So it's just really been a fascinating time on how the consumer has been. So that's been one of the big changes. The second really big change is how we've been doing our shopping. As Peter alluded to, online has just grown dramatically during this period. And we probably advanced 3 to 5 years from where we were. We were already headed down this path, but it has just taken off. But with overall spend still being up compared to a year ago across all industries, it's not just online. In-store has also been up. And in fact, over the last 3-4 weeks, in-store has been up. In our industry, it's been up actually over for several months. So we still need the in-store part as well as the online. We see things like direct-to-consumer up. We see things that have made the consumer shopping journey better, whether it's less queues in the store, to contactless payment, to curbside pickup, to direct delivery. So there's just been so much innovation that has happened around the shopping experience that it's just been kind of fascinating to watch. And the report talks a little bit about that. And right now, I think it's really critical for manufacturers and retailers to be adapting to the changes in the consumer's eating behaviors for the cookware folks, but also in how we're shopping for products just to make sure we're on top of things.
It's such an interesting time, and so much of what you just talked about, I was part of many of those groups and trends. It's funny you mentioned I didn't buy a 65-inch, but things that were considered probably frivolous or wants became needs almost, because you were going to be, it's an investment in your family time and your home time. It's just
Absolutely.
incredible how this period of time just shifted everything.
Yeah, I have a colleague who he does what I do for the tech industry, and he says that. He says TVs, we went from being a want to exactly that, to an essential products. And that really has been the things, those discretionary things like beauty and apparel have been struggling, but those things that are deemed essential, and the good news for us, we're part of that equation, regardless of whether there's a second, third, or fourth spike. We continue to be the place that people are spending money on, without a doubt.
Well, I've contributed to the cookware growth, but I've also contributed to the golf club growth. So, you know.
Well, thank you, Joe, for that. It's just incredible to see how this shift is happening. So, Mike, you were a big part of the new report format, and with your insights on the retail market, I actually have two questions for you. First is, can you comment on Amazon Prime Day, which just shifted from July to last week, October 13th and 14th? And then how the various retail markets had to adjust as a result of the challenges that COVID brought.
What's interesting is Prime Day moving to October resets essentially the holiday calendar. And if you look at the success that Amazon had, and this is a reaction to COVID, and just as our top 50 and our decision to look at the industry in a different way was a reaction to COVID, I would think it would be very doubtful that Amazon would not repeat a October event next year. And if you look at the entire industry followed Amazon. And in fact, even though they were already counter-programming Amazon's Prime Day when it was in July, they put in a huge effort. Target has already come out and said that it was their version of this on the same days was a big success. Now, this has a lot of ramifications for holiday. Holiday has been gradually moving back. You know, I think now Walmart starts layaway for holiday in August. But this was a big shift, and it has two ramifications. One is moving sales earlier in the year, but it also has a ramification for, do you prompt consumers to purchase more by getting them to buy a lot of their gifts early? You know, shopping is part of the holiday season. So we've actually seen a very solid example of how COVID is changing not only the individual behaviors of retailers, but the industry. You know, you take that, and again, we can't say for certain what they're going to do next year, but I think they had something like a $3 billion lift in terms of the sales. You don't leave that behind.
No, you don't. I tell you, it's funny because it's something I was watching. I'm in New Jersey, and we got hit pretty hard during COVID with lockdowns and quarantines. We bought last week in anticipation of another possible lockdown or something shutting down around the holidays and not being able to get gifts for our kids. So it was that mindset of, you know, because when we were in the middle of it, you couldn't get a shipment from anywhere. You couldn't get anything. And we just said, let's buy it now and be ahead of the curve, because we're seeing some spikes and things like that. So it's interesting. And I think we'll always have this mindset of being proactive and be prepared. Well, thank you, Mike, for that. It's very interesting where we're headed. I'm going to actually take a quick break here to remind everyone that you're listening to the Cookware Manufacturers Association podcast with Peter, Mike, and Joe. We're sharing insight and experience on the new Top 50 Housewares Retailer Report and the new insights this report is providing. HomeWorld Business can be found on their website, homeworldbusiness.com, NPD on their website, npd.com, and you can learn more about the CMA from our website, cookware.org. So let's get back to the conversation. Mike, before we get back to the details of the report, going back to the discussion on Prime Day and this touch on the holiday season keeps moving back, do you think, or can we even predict if this significant shift is here to stay?
There's going to be a ramification for this. Will it look exactly the same next year as this year? That I don't know, and I don't even know if Amazon knows at this point. But they've had a success. And again, you don't walk away from success. But Amazon has been in an evolution that touches on how retail online is evolving internationally. We can go to Alibaba has a festival. The major Chinese online retailers have these festivals that are a mix of selling and entertainment and have been wildly successful. How each segment of the market reacts to this may be different. Some, it goes back to Joe's point. A lot of things have been moved forward very quickly. They've been, we keep talking about a catalyst. This is a catalyst, but a lot of times this was based on things that were already happening. And even incidentally, people were prepared for it. Target had purchased Shipped and now had the capacity to do deliveries during the pandemic when people didn't want to go out. Walmart obviously had been advancing its pickup function and actually adding to the physical plants to make pickup easier. You have some of the segments. One of the funnier ones is warehouse clubs, because warehouse clubs didn't have to do anything different. They just had to be there for their members and were very successful across the board. And then you have other segments. And sometimes it's an individual company where you have a really interesting thing happening. And the supermarket sector, sometimes gets accused of lagging behind retail trends. And I would make the point that sometimes it tries to drag them backwards. But some of the supermarket operators, even the traditional ones, have been preparing for a new marketplace. And the foremost example is Kroger. Now, getting supermarket customers to change their habits is very difficult. And Kroger has put a lot of effort into trying to get that to happen with, what success it's had. All of a sudden, things like delivery and pickup and shopping online for groceries became a big issue. And Kroger was there for it. Kroger had gotten ahead of this. But what's really fascinating, and again, it's about what's going to happen going forward. Now that Kroger has gotten its shoppers and even new shoppers used to the idea of delivery and pickup and all that, they're creating a system of warehouses that are automated warehouses with a company from Britain called Ocado. And Ocado is a delivery or a warehousing and delivery function that is highly automated, uses a lot of artificial intelligence to route deliveries, and has been a big success in the urban space. Place Kroger doesn't really play. So now it's gotten itself some momentum in the virtual kind and delivery kinds of retailing. It's made a huge investment in Ocado. It's opening up warehouses all across the country. And this situation with COVID may have put it in a position where, again, they may be 3 years ahead. By the time they open the first Ocado, there's one or two opened in Canada for Sobeys. They may be 3 years ahead of where they would have been opening up Ocado, and 3 years ahead in terms of customer acceptance just because of COVID. And so you have a situation where their return on investment becomes much more immediate. This has ramifications where we're only just starting to figure out what's going to happen. And, I had a discussion with somebody, just the other day, and it goes back to housewares, because people who were heavily involved in housewares tended to do very well. And home furnishings tend to do very well in this. But we were talking about what happens to the caffeine industry, because if you're working at home, you just can't stop at Starbucks on your way to work. But you can buy a single-serve coffee maker, which was supposed to be the answer to the cost of Starbucks years ago. Maybe and I've noticed Starbucks doing a lot of commercials for its creamers and such. And maybe Starbucks is anticipating this. So the ramifications go in a lot of different directions.
It's going to be really interesting to watch how this evolves. Thanks, Mike. Joe, back to you. In addition to keeping an eye on this significant shift that Mike's been talking about and in the selling periods, are there other consumer shifts to be aware of? And what about the supply side?
I would be thinking about, we have been ready for a change. If you think most generations are 15 to 20 years, if you do boomers, millennials, Gen Z, whatever the case, Gen Xers, like they will give you a time period that's about 15 to 20 years. So we had a big disruption in 2008 and 9 with the recession. So we're kind of ready for that next thing. And obviously what that next thing is happening right now, right at the time that the Gen Zers are starting to get employed or starting to set their lives up. So I got a feeling that a lot of the things and habits that we build right now are going to last for 10 to 15 years. So one of the keys is how do we stay on top of this? And part of it, from a retail perspective, you talked about supply and demand, is being agile. It's being enough that not only is it a case that if there's a breakout in this state or that state, or there's fires like we saw out west, they have the ability to quickly adjust not only the distribution of product, but also your marketing so that it goes to the needs with it. So I think agility is going to be a key thing that goes with it. The second part is how we got to make sure that we leverage the changing needs. So right now, historically, we've been spending about $145 billion on entertainment, whether that's movies, concerts, professional sports, whatever the case may be. Well, all that's gone right now. And similarly, or at least reduced significantly, as well as all the kids' activities in the evenings. So there's new behaviors and new habits that are happening in the home that we got to also continue to foster and realize that we're competing against these other needs that other industries and consumers will be trying to go after. So I think it's important right now that we continue to focus on those needs. We continue to think of new ways to innovate, both in product and marketing. We continue to think about all the changes that Mike was talking about on the back end from a supply side and getting the product to the consumer, continue to innovate there. And part of it just changes even the mindset that we have. If you think about it, a lot of times I'll get these questions, is there a change in selling periods that's happening? Well, I think we got to change it. It's about buying periods. It's about what are the consumer needs driving it and driving these occasions. And I think right there, just changing and making that consumer the center is going to set us up for success for the next 15 to 20 years.
I think it goes back to your point earlier where you said it was an important time in our industry, and we have the ability now to find ways to change consumers' lives. And that has to be our focus, is not just what do they want, but what do they need right now? And I think that's what a lot of these things are doing. Mike, you touched on Starbucks. I don't know I'll ever give up my Starbucks, but I did exactly what you described. I went out and invested in the single serve. I got all my Starbucks K-Cups. Peter, your word, pivot. We all pivoted in our own lives, right? So thanks, Joe. Actually, Peter, back to you. Now let's get to the whole heart of it all. The top 50 report itself. It was really eye-catching to see that headline on the cover when it was released. So what does the report tell us, and what should those reading it be looking for?
Well, it was a significant pivot. And again, the history of this report was you could kind of measure trends over time. Obviously Amazon.com, if you go back 25 years ago, wasn't even on our top 100 list. It was in the top 10 of our last top 100 list, which was a year ago, but it was number one this year. And no one's going to be surprised by that when you look at the first half of the year. What's interesting is Amazon, for the first part of the lockdown pandemic, really wasn't bringing in new housewares. It had kind of stopped some orders. It was fulfilling quote unquote essentials. I think everyone learned soon thereafter that housewares was an essential product. And you saw the industry and retailers kind of scrambling to get their hands on goods and doing their best to ship. And it's been a real problem. And supply chain shortages remain a potential issue heading into the holiday. But what you need to do with the top 100 list, and I'm going to, if you look at the list, and I've got it right here, so I'm using it as a reference. If you look at the top retailers, none of them are going to surprise you necessarily. Most of them were open, stores and digital through the early part of the lockdown and as the quarantine was lifted. I think you have to sometimes look deeper into the list. And over the years, I used to tell people, I knew people who would get the top 100 list and they'd kind of check off, got them, I'm selling them. I said, you do need to congratulate yourself for selling those retailers, but what you really need to be looking at is who are the retailers that you're not selling, who is kind of in that bottom half of the list that you may not even be aware of as an opportunity. So I think people have to understand that when they look at this list. I'm not going to go through it 1 through 50. You can get it. You can take a look at the report at homeworldbusiness.com. And if you need a copy of it, you can order a copy of the issue through the website. What I am going to tell you, though, is if you look at the list and you see retailers toward the bottom that have never been on our top 100 list before, such as Rural King in Illinois, Ocean State Job Lot, Academy Sports and Outdoors, and even Dick's Sporting Goods. You start asking yourself, well, why are they on a top 50 housewares list? It's because there are certain categories within that sector that kind of cross into the housewares realm. It could be hydration and other health and wellness products in a sporting goods store. It could be everything from camping and outdoor products in a more kind of rural setting, like Tractor Supply and Rural King. And you have to ask yourself, okay, during the pandemic, they emerged as a top 50 housewares retailer, and I wasn't paying attention to them before, but I certainly need to be paying attention to them now. Yes, you have to set your business up to take care of those retailers at the top of the chart. We've been doing that for years. 30 years ago, everyone was wondering how they were going to service Walmart. Well, they figured out how to service Walmart. 15 years ago or so, everyone said, how am I going to service Amazon and digital? And many figured that out. To Mike and Joe's point earlier, a lot of what we're seeing here is not something that happened really overnight. It appears that way. What it was an acceleration of business trends, consumer trends, all these things that were sort of in place. The move to digital, well, we didn't just happen in the pandemic. You had to get ready for that long before the pandemic. Those that were in better shape to succeed during the pandemic. Those that weren't were more vulnerable. So while the pandemic seems to have created this absolutely upside down universe, all it has done is validated the best businesses leading into it. Vendors have to be aware of that as they kind of build their programs going forward. We don't know exactly what will happen in the first 6 months of 2021, but I would bet that this top 50 is actually a bit of a harbinger of a more permanent change or some permanent change that we'll see going forward. And HomeWorld Business actually plans to look at next year, take a look at the market the same way we did this year. We're not going to necessarily revert back to a top 100 list that's 7 months old by the time you're looking at it. We need to deliver information in real time. The industry needs to get that information in real time and process it in real time. It also has to plan for multiple scenarios. You can't lock into a scenario. We've learned that when no one had any answers to questions early in the pandemic, the best operators learned how to plan for multiple scenarios. And as more clarity has emerged, to narrow down your game plans to fit those things. The consumer is king right now. If you look at the way we used to think of retailers and channels, and suppliers would focus on trying to sell certain channels. Well, those channels sort of exist, but the reality of it is with Amazon and with e-commerce, the whole world is a mass market right now. So if you were a vendor that said, I could build my business focusing on a certain channel in the past, you can't think that way anymore. You have to recognize that every retailer who is an outlet for housewares, whether in store or online, is a potential customer that you have to pay attention to. So that blurring of the lines is something that happened long before COVID, and it's continuing to happen now. So again, this is one way of looking at it. It's not the total number so much that matters in terms of total volume, although we rank them by total volume. It's where they stand on the chart. It's understanding what those retailers have done to either rise or fall in terms of their importance in the category. Kind of like a hit record going up the Billboard charts. You want to make sure you're plugged into those guys at the bottom who are going to be near the top in the next few years. And maybe you have to be aware of those that are going to fall off and be very careful with them.
It's interesting. I love what you said about accelerated changes that were already in motion. I think that's how everything we do is going to be over the next few years. And this ability to pivot and adapt and change. It was a hard time we all faced, whether business or personal, and that's really the message that comes out of it is pivoting.
Sure. Joe talked about agility. The real story was the winners were already pretty agile. Mike talked about Kroger coming in with the Ekata warehousing program, and for a channel, supermarkets that historically weren't trendsetters and leaders in terms of some of those operational things, although distribution, obviously they were. You don't look at it as quote unquote a new normal. Look at it as an evolving normal, because just when you think you've caught up to the new normal, the next normal is going to be right around the corner.
It's an excellent point. It's really interesting. And what these retailers do with, especially the ones who connected with retailers, and Joe, to your point earlier about brick and mortar, there were some that were really there for us and really came through for us. And those that didn't need to learn from them, and those that did need to make sure they keep it going. Well, I'm going to wrap this up by reminding people that you're listening to the Cookware Manufacturers Association podcast, and I want to thank Peter, Mike, and Joe for your insight and information. I do have one more question for you guys. So with the home sales doing so well during COVID, and I know someone touched on this before, but if we could make a prediction, is this a bubble or will it increase in-home product sales continue?
So I will say we just finished our Future of Home, which is a report where we forecasted several hundred subcategories and what their growth is. And I can say for 2021, well, for the holidays, we're forecasting to be up this holiday season. But for 2021, it will be down compared to 2020. It's really going to be hard to comp. But what we're talking to people about is really, if you compare it to 2019 and years before, that's really what your bogey should be. And we should be much better than we were at that time. We will still, through Q1, be spending more time in our homes than we have historically because of everything. And even after that, I think as consumers, it's not only when there's a vaccine that is out there and available and applied, but it really gets into when does the consumer get comfortable to start doing some of that experiential stuff that we used to do, whether it's flying on planes, whether it's staying in hotels, whether it's going to restaurants at full capacity, all of that part, as well as regulators, how that play out. So I think the demographics are in our favor. I think the consumer needs are in our favor. I think that we will continue to be strong for years to come if we play our cards right, if we're smart about this and we invest and we attack it with urgency. We should do well. It'll be tough to comp 2020, but compared to 2019 and years before that, we should continue to do very well.
I think it's a really important point to make sure that you're thinking about not COVID this year will always be an anomaly. It'll be, a unique situation, but that's important to compare to where we were and see where the trends go.
We think of consumers purchasing for their homes. There's something beyond that in that consumers are investing in their homes. When you buy the big TV, when you buy new cookware, when you learn to use your TV maybe effectively for the first time, when you learn to cook a new cuisine, that keeps you in the home. And it not only means that you're staying closer to home, but a lot of the things people bought early in the pandemic at sometimes with some difficulty and maybe just settled on things. As they spend more time at home, I don't think there can be an expectation that people are suddenly next year, in the middle of next year, suddenly going to run out and populate bars and restaurants and hotels. I think that's going to be a long process. They put money in their homes with all of these appliances, with all of these electronics. They're going to use them, and they're going to look around and say, you know what, I can make this even more comfortable if I'm going to spend this time at home. We've just seen the DIY market take off. If you're putting in things, if you're actually installing things in your home or fixing them, again, that's another reason to stay home. And I think that's going to have an effect on the marketplace for at least the middle term and maybe longer.
Yeah, one thing to think about this, and this will put it kind of into context, and I don't have the cookware number off the top of my mind, but I do know I looked at cookers recently. So think of cookers, your air fryers, your multi-cookers, your slow cookers, all those things lumped together. During the pandemic, using our checkout data, roughly about 6% of the population purchased that. And it's only 2 to 3% more than we historically have purchased. Or put another way, there's still 94% of households that still could buy this stuff. Like there still is, even despite everything being as hot as it is, we have to remember there's more than 120, 130 some million households there's still 330 million people eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacking, all of them having frustrations and needs to be solved. There still is so much runway for us.
In the context of a pure black and white answer, Fran, to whether or not it's a bubble or not, I think to some degree, and Joe kind of talked about it, it is a bit of a bubble. And because something like this doesn't happen very often that instantly changes the dynamic of growth in this industry. And I think that's the important part. Maybe, as Joe said, we're an industry that likes to comp against the previous year. Well, we got to change that behavior a little bit as businesses when we head into 2021, because comping against 2020 is really going to be a very difficult and really a fruitless challenge. And you can go back to 2019 or 2018. I think what is important is to understand that housewares historically, if we look at the last 30 years, housewares is not a business that typically jumps 25%. It's not a bubble business, nor does it fall off the cliff when the economy is doing poorly. It is a business that is sustained by basic product and the need for those things. If the bubble does sort of drop a little bit, not burst so much, that's going to be understandable. I think the more important thing is to understand the behaviors that, again, weren't invented during the pandemic. They were validated and vetted and verified during the pandemic. We were already talking about people upgrading their cookware, and Mike's right. People are going to upgrade the stuff they bought in March and April, and Joe's right. There's so much left untapped right now that's out there. So this industry has to, at some point, and will at some point, settle back to understanding how to sustain and manage reliable growth. No one wanted the pandemic, and with all the heartache and hardship, the fact that the housewares business did very well is a welcome business consolation, but it is an anomaly to some extent, and we hope from a health standpoint it's clearly an anomaly. But the businesses that, again, had the head start in understanding how to be responsive, adaptive, agile, those that know how to pivot well, are going to be the ones that can sustain growth and take market share over the next several years. This business is on a real high right now, and it has the potential to be very important for years to come. That's the easiest prediction I can make today.
It's an excellent point. And I think what HomeWorld Business and NPD did here is a great example of taking on these challenges of COVID and finding a new way forward. And that message is something we have to do everywhere. And in our businesses, in our daily lives, we have to just keep pivoting. That's really the message.
If they were able to adapt and take and create a scenario that they benefited during an emergency, imagine if you can apply those same business practices when you're not in an emergency, and imagine how good that can be for your business when you don't have to do it, but you want to do it.
A fun thing to think about going forward is this. The one thing that people have not been able to do with their homes in the pandemic is entertain. When the pandemic's over, they're going to go back to home entertainment. So a lot of this investment I was talking about now gets another dimension when it's not just the family, it's friends and relatives. So that's something that may wind up being a second surge that we'll see not in the pandemic, but in purchasing of goods for the home.
Excellent point. And it's something I think, if anything, the report and our discussion, it's about the data, and it's also about paying attention to and we're part of that group, what consumers are doing and what that next step, what that next need is. And it really focuses on
If I can speak for Joe and NPD Group, NPD has always been about more than just the data.
Yep.
It's been about trying to understand what that data tells you. And data often looks back and not forward. The ability to take data and apply forward thinking to it is what separates the real successful companies out there.
I'm still affected, Joe. You brought up that $145 billion number. I keep thinking about, I'm in that group at the concerts and all that, and that's going to stay changed for me. I didn't realize how much I spent there. And now where is that money going to go? So it's so interesting how the data you find at NPD and the trends you identify from it, they really have such an impact. This has been a fantastic conversation, and it's so critical for our industry to hear this and pay attention to this and know how this report came together and how all these trends and information emerged from it. I want to thank you guys. Peter, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks,
Joe,
Fran.
Mike, you guys are incredible for sharing your time.
Guys, it's a pleasure to be with you guys. Thank you.
Very much. Agree. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well, I'm going to wrap this up. My name is Fran Grossbeck. We are recording for the Cookware Manufacturers Association. You can find my contact information and more at our website, cookware.org. The association is a proven, valuable resource to our members. We maintain and update the engineering standards for the production of cookware and bakeware. We provide timely statistical reporting, resources for retailers, including cookware training guides, and member networks with the best in our industry. And of course, real-time links to podcasts like this one. You can find more information at cookware.org, and you will find this podcast there and other member section in the member section of our website, as well as on iTunes, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Stitcher, Google Play, and many more. Thank you so much.